Hello Year 10, this is week 2 of your Romeo and Juliet lessons. This week we need to start working through some of those key scenes. So the focus of this week will be the prologue and some of the key scenes from Act 1. We start again with a quick quiz, so have a go at answering these questions to recap some of the things we went through last week. The answers, if you need them, are in the notes section at the bottom of the PowerPoint. So we're going to dive right in with the prologue. That's the focus of this lesson today. So the first speech given in Romeo and Juliet is delivered by the chorus. Now the chorus are a group of actors who comment kind of from outside the main action on the action itself, usually through song. Now the first part of the play is what we call, in this instance, a prologue. A prologue is something that's given before the main action. It's the opening of the story that establishes the setting and gives background details. And in most cases, it tells you some of what will happen in the story. So the question really to ask ourselves is, why do writers include a prologue? It may be necessary to provide some background information. It may help to suggest something about the story itself. So as we read through the prologue for Romeo and Juliet, think about why Shakespeare might have included it. Okay, so the prologue delivered by the chorus goes like this. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parent strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which, but their children's end, naught could remove, is now the 2 hours' traffic of our stage. The which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. What you may have noticed with this prologue is the end word of every other line seems to rhyme. There's a pattern there. So if we take the first line and we call that line A, okay, the end word of that is dignity. The next line, scene, doesn't rhyme with dignity, so that becomes line B. Then if you go to the next line, mutiny, that does rhyme with dignity. We've got the same sounding word, so that's also line A. And then we've got unclean, which rhymes with seen, so that's also line B. Then moving down, that word foes doesn't rhyme with unclean, mutiny, seen, or dignity, so that becomes now line C. Life, again, doesn't rhyme with anything before, so it becomes line D. But then when we get to the line that says overthrows, that rhymes with foes, so that's also line C. And strife rhymes with life, so that's line D, and so on and so forth. So what we end up with is this kind of alternate rhyme scheme. So we've got AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, until we get to G, where we've got a rhyming couplet, 2 lines after each other that rhyme, attend, mend. With that regular rhyme pattern emerging, it feels quite poetic, and that's because it is. The prologue is actually a poem, it's a sonnet. It has 14 lines, and it has that rhyme scheme that we just talked about, AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, EF, GG rhyme scheme. Therefore, it can be broken down into 3 quatrains, So A, B, A, B, that's one quatrain. C, D, C, D, those lines are one quatrain. E, F, E, F, those lines are a quatrain. And then G, G, that rhyming couplet at the end. What we've also got here is in each line there are about 10 syllables. Okay, and I've put ish there because with translations as they come through it can be a bit different, but pretty much there are 10 syllables in each line. Therefore, this is what we call a Shakespearean sonnet. And the first quatrain gives us an introduction. Okay, it kind of gives us that introductory information. The second quatrain elaborates on the details. And the third quatrain introduces conflict or something, some sort of shift in tone or setting. And the rhyming couplet at the end concludes the poem, okay, concludes the information. Okay, so this prologue is a Shakespearean sonnet. If this is sounding a bit complicated, don't panic. I know sometimes when we can read Shakespeare, it can seem a bit foreign and a bit alien, but remember you don't have to understand every word. And even on first reading, you can pick out things that you do understand, particularly based on your prior learning. So if we think about what we know about prologues, okay, they introduce a play to us, they introduce the story, and we know the story of Romeo and Juliet. So let's just think first of all about the first things we might pick out from this prologue. So we know when it refers to two households that it's referring to the Montagues and the Capulets. We know that this play is set in Italy, in that real city of Verona, so we know that's the setting. We know that phrase ancient grudge. Okay, to have a grudge against someone is like a conflict. And we know there's been a long-standing conflict between those two families. We know the reference of blood is probably to do with the violence or the families that have been feuding. We know that Romeo and Juliet commit suicide. We know that these star-crossed lovers take their life. And we can also pick out other ideas, other language that makes sense to us. It's now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. Okay, well, 2 hours is about the length of the play. So already we can pick out some meaning just based on our prior learning and words that we know and understand. Let's think now about other words that you might understand or be able to take some meaning from that might help you understand this prologue. So I've highlighted words like dignity, ancient grudge, blood, fatal, star-crossed lovers, misadventured, piteous, death, strife, fearful, death-marked love, and rage. Your task is to write those words down and to think about what they mean, first of all, and think about what they suggest. What images do they create? Whilst we need to read and study the Shakespeare, you cannot forget there is also plenty of modern translations available to help you understand the language, because it is difficult, it is different to the language that we use now. So just as a reference, a modern translation of this would be: in the beautiful city of Verona, where our story takes place, a long-standing hatred between two families erupts into new violence, and citizens stain their hands with the blood of their fellow citizens. Two unlucky children of these enemy families become lovers and commit suicide. Their unfortunate deaths put an end to their parents' feud. For the next 2 hours, we will watch the story of their doomed love and their parents' anger, which nothing but the children's deaths could stop. If you listen to us patiently, we'll make up for everything we've left out in this prologue on stage. So what you'll notice from the modern translation is that actually our first reading, and even just those few bits of language we were able to pick out, was able to give us some understanding of what the prologue was telling us. This slide brings together all of the things you would have thought about over this lesson, but it does so in a way that we would annotate a poem, because essentially the prologue is a poem. So read through these annotations carefully to summarise your understanding and your learning of this prologue. Your final task is to explain how each of these images links to the prologue. So you'll start by saying picture 1 represents whatever it is in the prologue, and you're aiming to write about 3 sentences per image. It may help you to think back to your notes about context from last week, things about fate and destiny, life in Elizabethan society, etc. We're going to dive straight in with lesson 6 because this is all about Act 1, Scene 1, and there's quite a lot to get through. So in this scene, we start by showing the violence between the two families, and it gives that awareness to the audience of the problems caused by this feud. We then move on to the Montague and Capulet servants fighting in the street, who are then joined by Tybalt and Benvolio. And then the prince threatens dire punishment if any more fighting occurs. The scene ends with Romeo, who wasn't present in the fight, telling his friend Benvolio about his love and obsession with Rosaline. Okay, the first part of the scene features no major characters. It is just the servants who establish the conflict between the two families. So we've got Samson from Team Capulet, who says, "A dog of the house of Montague moves me." To which someone also in Team Capulet, Gregory, replies, "The quarrel is between our masters and us their men." Samson replies, "Nay, as they dare, I will bite my thumb at them, which is a disgrace to them if they bear it." At this point, Abraham from Team Montague notices and says, "Do you bite your thumb at us, sir?" Now, to bite your thumb at someone was a real insult at the time. So Samson has kind of baited the fight by biting his thumb at Abraham. You'll also notice some of the other language used there to establish the conflict between the two families. Okay, Samson refers to the Montagues as dogs. Gregory refers to the quarrel, as well as that biting thumb incident. Then joining the fight, we've got Benvolio, who is Team Montague. But if you remember from the character information, Benvolio is actually quite peaceful and tries to stop the fighting. So he says things like, "Part fools, put up your swords, you know not what you do." And by put up your sword, he means put it away. And he also says, "I do but keep the peace, put up thy sword, or manage it to part these men with me." You know, he's trying to get them to put the swords down and to stop the fighting. Against him, though, for Team Capulet is Tybalt, Juliet's cousin. Now, if you remember him from the character information, he was described as aggressive, he seems like the villain throughout, and he definitely holds a grudge against Romeo. So during that fight scene, he says things like, "What? Art thou drawn amongst these heartless hinds? Turn thee, Benvolio, look upon thy death." What? Drawn and talk of peace? I hate the word, as I hate hell, all Montagues, and thee. Have at thee, coward. So he cannot let go of his hatred, and he keeps the fight going. He has no interest in putting his sword down or in peace. Because of the fighting between the two families, the prince, or the ruler of Verona, intervenes, and he says this to the two families: "Rebellious subjects, enemies to peace, profaners of this neighbour-stained steel, will they not hear? What, ho, you men, you beasts, that quench the fire of your pernicious rage with purple fountains issuing from your veins. On pain of torture from those bloody hands, throw your mistempered weapons to the ground, and hear the sentence of your moved prince. 3 civil brawls, bred of an airy word, by thee, old Capulet and Montague, have thrice disturbed the quiet of our streets, and made Verona's ancient citizens, cast by their grave, beseeming ornaments, to wield old partisans in hands as old, cankered with peace, to part your cankered hate. If you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace." So think about some of this language that he used to describe the two families: rebellious, enemies to peace, beasts. He describes their rage as pernicious, okay, really awful. He says they've got bloody hands. Okay, he references the fact that these brawls have been bred of this airy, ancient word from Capulet and Montague. So he orders them to throw their mistempered weapons to the ground. And then that threat at the end is the most important bit: "If you ever disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit." Okay, so that modern translation there: if you ever cause a disturbance on our streets again, you'll pay for it with your lives. During this particular fight, Romeo is nowhere to be seen, so his father asks, "Well, where is he?" To which Benvolio replies, "Many a morning hath he there been seen, with tears augmenting the fresh morning dew, adding to clouds more clouds with his deep sighs." So basically saying he's been crying and sighing. And that makes Lord Montague, Romeo's father, acknowledge that "away from the light steals home my heavy son, and private in his chamber pens himself, shuts up his windows and locks far daylight out, and makes himself an artificial night." So basically Romeo's just been locking himself away and being really, really sad. Because if you remember at the beginning of the play, Romeo is really sad and melancholy about his unrequited love for Rosaline. So Benvolio goes to find Romeo and they discuss Romeo's love and how he feels about it. Benvolio asks him, what sadness lengthens Romeo's hours? He's asking him what's he so sad about, what's making the day feel so long for him. To which Romeo replies, not having that which having makes them short. I've got nothing which makes the day fly by really quick. Benvolio asks him if he's in love. Romeo says, out. Benvolio asks, are you out of love? Romeo says, out of her favour, or I am in love. She doesn't like me and I love her. So Benvolio says, alas, that love, so gentle in his view, should be so tyrannous and rough in proof. He's talking about this love that's causing him pain. And then Romeo gives this speech which is full of opposites. He says, alas, that love, whose view is muffled still, should without eyes see pathways to his will. Where shall we dine? And then he notices the blood, the evidence of the fight. O me, what fray was here? Yet tell me not, for I have heard it all. Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. And then he's back to that feeling of love that he has with Rosaline. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first created, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep, that is not what it is. This love feel I, that feel no love in this. And as I said, that speech that Romeo just gave is full of opposites. And we'll talk about those in the next slide. So you can see as we draw attention to some of the phrases that Romeo uses in this speech, it is full of contradictions, full of opposites. He's got hate and then love. He's got brawling love, so that idea of fighting right next to this idea of love. Loving hate, heavy lightness, serious vanity, something that's, not so serious versus something serious. Misshapen chaos, something that's sort of all over the place and not the right shape. Of well-seeming forms, things that are well put together. A feather of lead, lead is something really heavy, a feather is something that's really light. Bright smoke, smoke is something usually quite dull. Cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep. They are all direct contradictions, they're not just opposites, and that's really important. So a direct contradiction is what we call an oxymoron. So loving hate is an oxymoron. Feather of lead is an oxymoron. Bright smoke, cold fire. They're direct opposites, direct contradictions. There's a conflict between them. But we need to think about why Shakespeare uses them. Why does Shakespeare use these oxymorons, these opposites, these contradictions to describe Romeo's feelings? We are, of course, building up to writing our own analysis about the language that Shakespeare uses. But for now, I'm going to model what that might look like using that sort of what, how, why structure that we're really familiar with. So if we go back to that question, why does Shakespeare use oxymorons to describe Romeo's feelings? You might say something like this. In Act 1, Scene 1, Shakespeare uses oxymorons to present Romeo's state of mind. When talking about his love, he cries out, "O brawling love, O loving hate," suggesting that love is causing him pain and sadness. The contradictions throughout his speech demonstrate the battle that is raging his head and his heart. Romeo comes across as overdramatic and possibly a little naive. The word brawling connotes a fight and suggests that his emotions are overpowering him. He is unable to control his love. Shakespeare wants the audience to see that Romeo is conflicted. Perhaps this is because he has not yet found his true love. So we've got that what, how, why structure, unpicking why Shakespeare has used a particular device. Your task though is to answer these 7 questions in full sentences. So you should be able to answer them using the information that's been discussed and talked through today. Okay, lesson 7. This lesson is all about understanding Act 1, Scene 2 of Romeo and Juliet. And we will start today with a bit of a longer quick quiz because the scene we're looking at today is a little bit shorter. So have a go at answering these questions, which helps to recap some of the things we talked about in the last couple of lessons. For this scene, it's really important for us to think about the context and things that were happening at the time. So let's just have a quick recap about some of the things we discussed last week. So if you remember, at this time, women had no rights or authority in law. They couldn't own any property or money. They were expected to follow the instructions of their male family members and not socialise with any other men and remain virgins until marriage. If they didn't do that, their reputation would be ruined and they may never be able to marry and they would have had to become nuns. It was not unusual for women to be married very, very young. Children were regarded as property and could be given in marriage to a suitable partner, and that was often because of a political or financial reason, as a way to sort of secure and retain wealth. And the father at the time was the undisputed head of the household. Okay, so it was a patriarchal society. And if we also think about what we know about Lord Capulet, okay, so we know that he's aggressive, we know that he's really protective of Juliet but treats her quite cruelly, and we know that he is sometimes caring. So those are the sorts of things from last time that we're going to need to remember for this scene. Okay, so this is the scene where Lord Capulet and Paris are arranging the marriage between Juliet and Paris. So as the daughter of a wealthy family, Juliet is expected to enter into an arranged marriage. Paris is related to the prince, the ruler of Verona, so he's considered quite an ideal candidate. He's a very eligible bachelor. He wants to marry Juliet, but at this point in the play, so in this scene, Lord Capulet is cautious and he wants to wait. He also says that he wants Juliet to be happy. So the conversation between Paris and Lord Capulet went like this. So Paris asks, "But now, my lord, what say you to my suit?" To which Lord Capulet responds, "But saying over what I have said before, my child is yet a stranger in the world. She hath not seen a change of 14 years. Let 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we may think her ripe to be a bride." So he's basically saying that she's too young to get married. She's not yet 14. And Paris says, "Younger than she are happy mothers made," because at the time it was common for women that young to be mothers and married in Elizabethan England. But in response to that, Capulet says this, "And too soon marred are those so early made. The earth hath swallowed all my hopes but she. She is the hopeful lady of my earth. But woo her, gentle Paris, get her heart. My will to her consent is but a part, and she agreed within her scope of choice lies my consent and fair according voice. So here Lord Capulet's actually being quite sweet and quite loving towards Juliet. He wants her to be happy. So he orders Paris to go and woo her, to win her heart, to make Juliet love him. Then it will be part Juliet's decision and part Lord Capulet's decision for the two of them to be married. So that conversation seems to highlight some of the things that were happening at the time that this play was written. So if we think about that in terms of a question, so how are views of the time reflected in Act 1, Scene 2? So we might start to say things like, Paris is negotiating with Lord Capulet for Juliet's hand in marriage, as was quite common at the time. Paris is asking for Lord Capulet's permission. He is the father, so he would have had the power to say yes or no. And Paris acknowledges that girls as young as Juliet are already mothers at the time. And as we said before, girls as young as Juliet were already mothers and married at the time. So if we were going to write about that, you might say, Shakespeare uses Paris to reflect attitudes towards women and marriage during the Elizabethan era. Paris asks, "But now, my lord, what say you to my suit?" A question which demonstrates how marriages were arranged between the men in the patriarchal society. Women had little choice in their marriages. It was as if they were bought and sold like property. Perhaps Shakespeare is using Paris to criticise this view of marriage. Okay, so that sort of summarises those ideas. But, as we've said, Lord Capulet at the moment seems to reject those ideas. So let's think about what that might look like. So if the question now is how does Shakespeare use Lord Capulet to reject ideas of the time about women and marriage, we might draw on some of these ideas. So Lord Capulet says girls who marry too young are spoiled, where he says, and too soon marred are those so early made. Lord Capulet wants Paris to win Juliet's love, okay, and love wasn't necessarily important in a marriage at those times. He says to Paris, "But woo her, gentle Paris, get her heart." And Lord Capulet also says his agreement is only part of the arrangement. Juliet has to agree too. And that wasn't necessarily what always used to happen. He says, "My will to her consent is but a part." So think about now how you might take some of those ideas and write your own paragraph similar to the example from the previous slide. If you want to have a bit of extra challenge, you might start thinking about the argument that perhaps Lord Capulet isn't truly rejecting those ideas. So the challenge there is this truly rejecting ideas about marriage and women at the time. This is the task that you'll have to submit to your teacher. Okay, this is lesson 8 of Romeo and Juliet, the last lesson of this week, and it's all about Act 1, Scene 5. So we start again with a quick quiz, and all of the answers are in the notes section underneath the slide. Act 1, Scene 5 is where the Capulets throw a masked ball, and it's the one that Romeo and the other Montagues crash. So Romeo's friends convince him to attend, telling him that it will help him get over Rosaline, that there are plenty more fish in the sea. However, when he arrives, not knowing who she is, he falls instantly in love with Juliet, and she, equally ignorant that he is a Montague, falls just as instantly for him. In this scene, Tybalt sees Romeo and his friends at the party and gets really angry, but Lord Capulet persuades him not to disrupt the festivities. But Tybalt swears vengeance on the Montague boys for daring to come to a Capulet party. At this party, Romeo catches sight of Juliet, and this is what he says when he sees her for the first time. Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright. It seems she hangs upon the cheek of night like a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear, beauty too rich for use, for earth too dear. So shows a snowy dove trooping with crows, as yonder lady over her fellows shows. The measure done, I'll watch her place a stand, and, touching hers, make blessed my rude hand. Did my heart love till now? Forswear it to sight, for I never saw true beauty till this night. So you'll see I've highlighted a couple of the devices that Shakespeare uses here to describe Juliet from Romeo's perspective. So just think about what device Shakespeare's using here and what it suggests. This is also the scene where Tybalt spots Romeo at the party and he's furious about it. Okay, he recognises him by his voice. This, by his voice, should be a Montague. So he turns to someone, he says, "Fetch me my rapier, boy. What dares the slave come hither, covered with an antic face, to fleer and scorn at our solemnity? Now, by the stock and honour of my kin, to strike him dead, I hold it not a sin." Lord Capulet asks him, "Why, how now, kinsman? Wherefore storm you so?" So he's asking him what's wrong. And Tybalt explains that, "Uncle, this is a Montague, our foe, a villain that is hither come in spite to scorn at our solemnity this night." Lord Capulet says, "Young Romeo, is it?" Tybalt says, "'Tis he, that villain Romeo. Fit when such a villain is a guest, I'll not endure him." So Tybalt's really angry. He doesn't want to put up with the fact that Romeo is there. But Lord Capulet doesn't want the party to be disturbed, so he says, "He shall be endured. What, goodman boy, I say he shall. Go to. I am the master here. Or you, go to. You'll not endure him? God shall mend my soul. You'll make a mutiny among my guests. You will set cock a hoop. You'll be the man." So Tybalt is furious that Romeo is at the party. He asks for a sword. He calls Romeo things like slave, foe, and villain. But Lord Capulet basically tells Tybalt to get over it and that he shall endure it. He asserts his authority over Tybalt as the master. So with Romeo now free to explore the party, him and Juliet finally meet. And before we look at the conversation itself, here are all the words in that conversation, kind of all crunched together. Look at them as a group, how many times they've been used, for example, and think about which words stand out to you. What do you think the tone of this conversation is going to be? This is the conversation itself now, but I've removed the names. So just look at it as a piece of writing and think about the structure. Think about what you might notice about the structure. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle fine is this. My lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Have not saint lips and holy palmers too? Ay, pilgrim, lips that they may use in prayer. O then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake. Then move not while my prayer's effect I take. So what you might notice here is that we've got words at the end of the line and we're starting to see that alternate rhyme scheme again. So hand, stand, this, kiss, much, touch, this, kiss. So actually the conversation they have is a sonnet. It's 14 lines, there's about 10 syllables in each line. We've got that A, B, C, D, E, F, G rhyme scheme, just like in the prologue. And sonnets are usually love poems or declaration of feelings poems. So it makes sense that the first conversation these two have, where they fall in love, structurally is a sonnet. This is the conversation now with the names in the right places. So before we think about what it is they're actually saying, let's start thinking about picking out that language again. So you'll notice that underlined in yellow, there are words like holy shrine, pilgrims, devotion, saints, holy palmers, and prayer. Now, all of those words have a kind of link. They're all quite similar, okay, all linked by the idea of religion. So both Romeo and Juliet make multiple references to religion. Okay, there's what we call a semantic field of religion. Now, as a reminder, a semantic field is a group of words which have a similar meaning or a link together. Also, underlined in red, there is a semantic field of touch. Both Romeo and Juliet reference lips, kissing, hands, touching. So we've got that kind of intermingling of physical touch and religion, and it creates that kind of internal conflict with Romeo and Juliet. They are both full of physical desire and lust, but also have religious concerns. Think about the time that this was written in. Okay, they would have been concerned about sin and being respectful, and that helps the audience to understand the seriousness of their relationship. It's not just about the physical, it goes into the kind of the spiritual as well. Okay, so let's think about what the conversation is actually about. So Romeo refers to his lips as two blushing pilgrims. He's combining physical and religious language. He's trying to convince Juliet of the purity of his actions through that metaphor. He's trying basically to convince her to kiss him by saying that that action is pure. She extends that metaphor by calling him a pilgrim, good pilgrim, but she tries to act modestly and respectfully by describing a kiss as a prayer. So again, linking physical and religious language. She's saying a prayer is a kiss. But by the end of the conversation, they've reached that understanding. They have agreed that a kiss and a prayer are similar, they're the same thing, so that they can now kiss without problem. They've made it so that the religious and physical language combines. And you'll notice once they've reached that kind of understanding, we've got that rhyming couplet at the end of the sonnet. Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake, then move not while my prayer's effect I take. But then, of course, they discover the true identity of each other. Romeo in conversation with the nurse, is she a Capulet? Oh dear account, my life is my foe's debt. Juliet also questions the nurse about Romeo's identity. His name is Romeo and a Montague, the only son of your great enemy. So Juliet, reeling from that news, says, my only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown and known too late. Okay, the final task of this week is this Educate quiz. So just click the link and log on with your usual username and password and complete the quiz on Act 1. All of the answers to the questions should be found in these slides. So if you've completed all of the tasks and read through all the information and listened to the information really carefully, you should be able to answer all of the questions.